Okay. Hello. This is a fugly old crazy bitch again. Um. So. Um. What happens? Now is there was an idea that someone came up with about what they call the older sibling syndrome and how it relates to anxious overachievement. So um. It's an attempt at sort of a generic discussion on it. It's probably going to be quite tangential and possibly not that in depth, but there's going to be an attempt made. So let's have a look at what that might mean. So there are situations where people are actual older siblings, and there are people who are raised as the older siblings. So in complex family environments where there's foster siblings, step siblings, and siblings who've been adopted in or out of the family, there can be situations where people are treated as a younger sibling when they're in fact an older sibling, and there are people who might experience life as an older sibling when they're in fact a younger sibling. So, for the purpose of this argument, we're going to talk about how you were raised, not your birth order. Okay, so how you're raised is important to this because that's your social role. So we're talking about the social role of the older sibling, not necessarily your birth order. Okay, and that's important. That's important to know because we can get into a little bit about how birth order varies from how you're raised and how that can influence things as well. Oh, anyway, yeah. Oh, wait, hang on. Birth order is can be different from how you're raised. Yes, of course. Okay, so we'll talk about. Does it take, for example, if you were raised in a family where, as though you were the oldest sibling, you would have all the responsibilities of the oldest sibling, the attitudes and beliefs that go with that social role, and obviously the attempt to act out that social role as best you can in accordance with that social role standards and how you're enculturated in that particular manner, and how you interpreted that, and the decisions you made about that, and whether you rebelled against it or not, or came up with a different strategy or whatever it might be. So that is the role of the older sibling. That person might not be the older sibling. It as a consequence of things like in Australian history, there was the stolen generations and the forced adoptions thing, as well as the pillow under the shirt phenomena that some families chose to do to avoid the forced adoptions thing and the stolen generation in some case. So that's that type of behaviour meant that there's been a bunch of people running around who thought that they were the older sibling, but they were not, and in some cases thought they were the younger sibling, but they were not. And so the roles that they were raised with and their actual birth order role, as far as their biological parentage was concerned, was not the same. It's also the case in the 21st century with the increase in the divorce rates. You have a lot of things like step siblings. So, step siblings, you might be a situation if you're raised with step siblings, your step sibling could be older than you. As a consequence, they have the social role of the older person, even though in the birth order of your biological siblings, you might be the oldest or the youngest. It might work the other way around. So, case of foster families and stuff like that, some people stay with the same foster family through for the rest of their life, and it becomes very similar to an adoption situation. And in some cases, they're only there for a year or two before they go home or adopted by a different family. So, for the time being, in that particular situation, they might have siblings that are foster siblings that they might be younger than or older than, and subsequently their roles start to shift. So that's a complex phenomena all on its own. So what older sibling syndrome is that there is some Christian groups that talk about the older brother syndrome, but they don't talk about is older sibling syndrome. So we're going to sort of de-Christianize that idea, okay, and sort of just talk about it as a generic idea. There is merit to the idea. So despite Christianity being a cannibalistic crock of shit, raising that issue is valid. Um, it is beyond the Christian context. It is a genuine social phenomena that's been found in multiple cultures. Um, that independent of the systems of inheritance that dowries and earths and estates came up with in Mesopotamia and Europe and whatever else, China as well. That typically the older sibling has more responsibility than the younger siblings. The reason for that is a fairly straightforward thing. In ancient times in particular, but families were often quite large. So to accommodate for the reduced survival rate and the high infant mortality rate, and also the lack of birth control, more people were made. So there could be a situation where there'd be a dozen siblings, a mini tribe, if you will. And of course, that takes a dozen years to do or more. And so by the time the youngest batch of siblings are created, the older sibling might be old enough to take on board some responsibilities to assist some very tired parents with their many, many duties. And also might be inclined to help because, as you would know, sometimes the little people want to know what the big people are doing and help out because they're looking forward to being big people one day and being able to make their own decisions and not being told what to do. In that respect, there is a balancing act when it comes to older siblings that has almost never been successful in any family. Some families have, in fact, tried. They try. The thing is though, is that it's very difficult to balance that out. So, in the situation of families where they're quite poor, so once the older siblings reach their teenage years, they might drop out of school and work. That's an unfair burden on those older siblings. If they had a part-time job or something like that, and were mostly just living their youth, getting an education, hanging out with their friends or something like that, then you go, okay, fair enough. But it's when there's an unfair burden type of thing. There's other situations where there's an unfair burden where sometimes people who are not in their teenage years have been expected to babysit or sometimes even almost exclusively do the parental duties of a very tired or mentally ill parent or whatever the case might be. And so the degree of responsibility and this is talking about like 5 or 6 different families, different pieces of that story came from 5 or 6 different families just at once. And so those particular families, the burden of responsibility on the older sibling has to be age appropriate. And so the families usually do try to do so. It also needs to be with consent with the older sibling as well. So one of the things that seems to have not really happened with the older siblings of the world is consent. Okay, they haven't sat down with the older sibling and said, "Do you consent to being an example for your younger siblings?" I mean, how can you be an example set an example for your younger siblings when you're not even old enough to exercise responsibility? Like you're not even. They're talking about just that one issue, the idea of the older sibling setting an example for the younger sibling. They're supposed to be an example of moral compass and proper comportment of behaviour because they learn all the discipline and stuff like that. So the older sibling gets disciplined, and they have to show the younger siblings the correct comportment of behaviour by leading through example. And it's like, well, hang on a second. Unless they're a full-blown adult at that time, they're not really capable of that. They could be an intelligent person, or they might not be. But that's actually an unfair burden of responsibility that's put on that person. They might have this unfair expectation that they are supposed to take the moral high ground that they're supposed to lead by example in their moral conduct at all times. That older sibling role might be a means by which they get validation from their parents as well, or other people in their community, and as a consequence, them setting a moral example for other people might be a means by which that they might feel like they have a social role at all. It might be very important to them. They might have we've been taught that it was important, whether or not it actually was. It's not to say that in those situations there isn't other social activities going on. It's not to say that those particular parents or someone in that situation didn't take responsibility, because they did. It's more the point that how can you be showing the moral compass to your community when you're not old enough to even know how to spell moral compass, is more the issue. And that's including in very bright people who are academically gifted perhaps and very good at reading. And so people in that particular situation, they get anxiety, okay, because this is something that's going to disappoint the new age community. Okay, you think love and light is a spell or an energetic state or a mantra or something like that, when that's not the case. Okay, love is a doing word. Okay, love is a doing word, and likability is distinct from love. So if you like someone, okay, you might like them because they both like the same type of motor car that you like, or the same type of sport or music or something like that. But if you dislike someone, you're probably going to dislike them on moral grounds. If you look at the actual pattern of human behavior, they usually dislike someone on moral grounds. They've been annoyed or harassed in some capacity, or they've engaged in annoyance or harassment. They've quote unquote scratched at your moral compass and pissed you off. And there's a grievance there. So you don't like them because they were rude or abusive in some capacity, or upset your moral sensitivities. And so when that happens, that means likability is strongly associated with moral compass. And the tweaking of moral compasses as it applies to each and every individual suggests that what's good for the goose is not good for the gander. What's good for the white man is not good for the black man. What's good for the rich man is not good for the poor man. And moreover, what's good for the gay is not good for the straight. Okay, the moral compasses that they're operating by are effectively social roles to respond to the grievances that the disaffection of other moral compasses have created. And so the role of the older sibling in that type of situations is supposed to be a leader for the other siblings, okay, and to have the expectation of leadership when it comes to is quite high. They don't actually want to be leaders most of the time, but naturally they are statistically more likely to be leaders than other people, because they were trained to do so. They were trained to lead their younger siblings. They were trained to be a moral compass and guide for those people. They were trained to explain to them what those people, younger people, didn't understand. Their parents were saying, "Oh, you don't know what mum and dad were talking about. Had to deal with that a while back. Okay, this is what it means, right? Okay, so that's one of the roles of the older sibling. So the older sibling is in a place of enormous amounts of anxiety. They're already placed in a position of anxiety because a burden of responsibility is put upon them before they are even an adult to act as a leader. So in a situation where they are technically a follower, because they are in fact not the adult, they're not the parent, they act as a secondary parent. Indirectly and not necessarily all the time. So you probably find that same older sibling is more likely to be the captain of a sports team, or take a leadership role in a sport team, or in Girl Guides or Brownies or Scouts or something like that, one of those extracurricular activities. Statistically, older siblings are probably more likely to do well academically, and where they don't, they do well in other areas, often as providers for their families or something like that, or defenders of some kind. The role of the older sibling is a complex role, which involves an enormous burden of care and concern for those in their charge, and often the inability to exercise that care and concern effectively because they don't really occupy that role at all. Okay, the older sibling is countermanded by the parents, by the aunts and uncles, by the grandparents, the teachers, the coaches, the society at large, and of course is not seen as a genuine authority by the younger siblings because they're actually peers. So the older siblings in an awkward position where they are expected to act as a leader and have all the responsibilities and emotional burdens that go with leadership and in particular moral compass in a situation where they're not respected for having it by anyone except for those that try and treat them as leaders, and so their sense of validation is off. They get validated for overachievement. They get validated for overachievement. They have to overcome the dissonant expectation that they are expected to be a leader without ever being treated like one. They have all the responsibilities of a leader with none of the support and recognition. And it's a role that they didn't ask for, but it's a role that was put upon them just by order they were being born, just by their social circumstances. And so the older sibling is someone who is usually not someone who's not respected. Someone who's is assumed to be arrogant when they are not. Someone who is expected to do things that are not necessarily outside of their capability over the long course of their life, but perhaps when they were younger. Someone who generates enormous amounts of anxiety because they have competing and conflicting ideas presented to them. And so, to the older siblings out there, you know what that means big time, don't you? You heard all that. You went, oh, thank you, because you fucking know. Okay, let's talk about older siblings who are not in truth older siblings and how complicated that can be. If an older sibling grows up with the knowledge that somewhere out in the world they also have an older sibling that they don't have access to for leadership and support in a similar way that maybe at times they might be expected to show to their younger siblings, but it doesn't really happen. Sometimes it's often with siblings it's a bit more complicated. They don't really act like that. Sometimes the younger sibling acts as a leader to the older sibling. Well, anyway, those younger siblings could perhaps, and including the one that's taken the role of older sibling, could discover that there's other siblings out there in the world that they don't have access to, that their parents have told them about, but due to the complex circumstances of their parents' lives, it means that they don't know them. They just know that they exist. And in some cases, there's true birth older siblings don't know that they have younger siblings. Here was a situation of family breakup where you get like half siblings, and so the two parents have moved on and they've formed different families. Then when the younger sibling, who is actually acting as an older sibling in their family where they're growing up with, might as an adult go and make friends with their older sibling and have complex relationships that might be good and neutral, or something else entirely confusing. They might not know how to handle it. In another situation says that in case of adoption, an older sibling could have been adopted out before the parent who was, say, forced to adopt that kid out or foster that kid out or whatever happened, starts a new family. And so the older sibling in that situation might find, say, their parent crying because they had to adopt someone out previously, and the kids go, why are you crying? Why are you crying? They miss your older sibling. They're like, what older sibling? Oh gosh, where are they? And they start looking around their whole life. Where's this older sibling? They want to play with them, what are they doing? Do they like the same stories they like? Do they want to go listen to music? Oh, that's so sad. What do they look like? Why is mum and dad sad for? And so when that might happen, it might be the case that the adopted out older sibling grew up in a family where they were the younger sibling in a family of adopted people. So when the adoptive family and the birth family unite in that situation, what happens is a very interesting role shift. Okay, the one who was given the role of the older sibling is now in the role of the younger sibling, and the one who was previously in the role of the younger sibling is now in their truth birth older role, which is the older sibling. And so they have to sort of navigate that a little bit when that happens for those people. And it causes both of them and the other siblings confusion, because the natural tendency of the true older sibling is to act in a leadership role. And, of course, the one who was raised as the oldest but wasn't the oldest is absolutely delighted to finally have their sibling back and loves them to bloody bits. And they're absolutely stoked they finally have someone to rely on, a big sibling to go, fantastic, there's someone to talk to, someone who's been around a bit longer but is still a peer, someone that they're not the one with all the burden of responsibility anymore. There's someone that can help, you know. And so in terms of sibling and sibling relation, this is with people with good parents. This is not even a bad parent story. This is a people with good parents story that's being articulated to say how complicated that can be. And so the birth order older sibling might go like this. They might go, yeah, the one was raised in a different family might go, they don't know what to do. They don't know what to do. They spent their whole time having the standard younger sibling thing. The older sibling got in trouble. When they mucked up, the older sibling got in trouble. Kelly, you know it. When the younger sibling mucks up, the older sibling gets in trouble because they're supposed to set the example. You fucking know it, okay? And so that younger sibling goes, oh, hang on a second, now they have to set an example. Okay, present all the ideals of what the moral compass is supposed to be, what the great things are and stuff like that. Set a great example, tell a great story, okay? Be completely likable to these people, okay? Right? Because you know, well, everyone's been looking for each other for such a long time. Oh, isn't it wonderful? Just put the best out there, okay? And they try their darndest. And guess what? Because they really are family, it doesn't last forever, okay? Family feuds fucking happen. You know when they've accepted each other? You know when they've accepted each other? It's the moment they start fighting, okay? You absolutely know for a fact, don't you, that the moment two people who are fucking related are accepting each other is when they're fucking fighting. Because with families, you can say things to them, presumably, if it's a good family, that you can't say to other people, okay? When you're growing up with someone, or with a sibling, okay, they know things like, that time that you picked your bum and you sniffed it, and told everyone that chocolate cake was really, really yummy. Would you like a smell? Okay, you know, stuff like that. They know embarrassing stories like that. That's not necessarily a true story for anyone, okay? There's hypothetical examples going on here. They know stuff like that. They know stuff about that time, that they know all the embarrassing fucking things you did growing up. Okay, all the embarrassing things about each other. They know all the scary, embarrassing things. And they, amazingly, don't hate you. Okay? Siblings steal from each other. They lie about each other. They get each other into trouble. Okay? They try and emphasize that moral compass shit on each other all the fucking time when they're growing up. Okay? And the older sibling remains loyal to the end to the best of their abilities. They just keep going and going and going. They'll slave away in the pits of hell if they have to, day after day, no matter how the fight seems fucking lost, for any one of their siblings, biological and non-biological. And you can see that the birth order older sibling can't fucking wait to jump in and fucking help. You don't have to do it all. It's not all your responsibility. They're the real older sibling. They want to look after you. Okay? Because that was denied them growing up. And they do actually care. So that's the thing of anyone who's an adoptee or a foster person out there, or anyone who's an older sibling, or a younger sibling. It is so true, isn't it? But we've got to ask a question. Okay? Anxious overachievement in older siblings, no matter which one it is, okay? Birth order or social role or both. Them people, okay, are they people who just put too much pressure on them? Did the people around them acknowledge just how much pressure they were putting on them? Try and say, oh, you don't have to do that, and so try to take the pressure off and whatever. But did they acknowledge they put that pressure on them? Is it the case that if someone is an older sibling in one generation, that they would treat their oldest children in the same way that they would treat them? Only a little bit. They will take off the burdens that they didn't like, that they grew up with, but some of the ones they will still keep. And so it's very much the case that the older siblings of the world have too much responsibility. They don't have a day off. They never have a day off. Elon Musk has never had a fucking day off and he's an older sibling. Who else is an older sibling? Go on. It's topical. His crap isn't necessarily narcissism. His crap is, although he's got that. We're not saying he hasn't got that. His crap isn't necessarily autism, although he's got that. Okay? There is the racism, okay, and the sexism he was raised with from the both Canadian and South African counterparts. But if you want to understand that man properly, he's got older brother syndrome and an anxious overachiever. Too much expectations were placed on him, and he, having no means of validation otherwise, went out of his way to meet those expectations, continuously meeting people from similar ideological ilks to the awful far-right crap that he was raised with, to continuously going down the track he was going down. So you don't have to like that, man. In fact, you shouldn't. Because if he was a real older sibling, he'd set a better moral fucking compass than that. But then again, he never got shown one in the first place. And maybe this is the world's way of saying how his moral compass was broken. Cheerio.